Showed you all we had and you suffered in your head. Returned you to your cell ID. Let you take your own life is all you ever asked. And the guilt don't understand that I'd give a grenade to ya. Give my hand with a blade to ya. Turn and look the other way for ya. I would say battle the way for you. Avoid all the torture and pain. Take a stick left straight through your brain. Yes, I'd let you end it, baby, so you won't feel the pain.
Hi, I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read. The Book of the New Sun by Wolfe is an extraordinary science fiction, science fantasy epic. The first novel of this 4-part series is The Shadow of the Torturer for its incredible world building, originality, epic scope, and despite difficult, clever, and purposely unreliable prose and narration, Shadow of the Torturer is fit to be read. Published in 1980, Shadow of the Torturer is a challenging and all-consuming story requiring the reader's full attention and, at times, leaps of faith. The Book of the New Sun is, of course, also featured high on my top 150 science fiction reads list. If you haven't watched that already, click on the thumbnail when it appears at the end of this episode. I would recommend this novel for those who like fantastical elements in their sci-fi, who welcome a reading challenge that offers a great sense of fulfillment upon completing an at times confusing series, and inspires you to crave an immediate reread of the whole series. The Shadow of the Torturer establishes many questions, nearly all of which are not fully addressed until completing the series. A reread of the series is a very different experience than the original journey. Also, if you read science fiction and you're tired of asking why a distant planet has one alien race in one locality and one simple uniform culture covering the whole planet, the Book of the New Sun is a good recommendation for you. This series features meticulous attention to complex civilization and a plausibly complex society. As with each review on this channel, the episode will begin with a spoiler-free review, character analysis, and some plot summary to introduce you to this novel. Referencing Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia and maybe some Wolfian inspiration, I may also attempt myself to work in and speak in some manner of rhymes, riddles, and rub-a-dub, more so to avoid spoilers than in an attempt to be cute.
You talk in rhymes and riddles and rub it up, but that doesn't mean anything to me. See, I used to be smart.
Following that, I will announce a 5 likes and 5 dislikes segment that will include spoilers for those who have read the novel and really want some spoilers. Also, if you like the original lyrics in the intro, keep coming back to the channel to see what's in store each week. Shadow of the Torturer is a fantasy. It is a sci-fi mind bender and thought blender. Shadow is unstable narration, memories and memories of memories, religious symbolism and iconography layered with themes, pursuits, and discoveries of regret, misery, redemption, self-discovery, mercy, power, love, and ambiguity among life, existence, and death. Shadow introduces main character Severian, an apprentice of the Seekers for Truth and Penitence, the Guild of the Torturers. The book is set on far future Earth, spelled U-R-T-H, and it's fair enough to call this Earth, E-A-R-T-H, Earth, more than 1 million years in the future. It's best to wade into Shadow, recognizing that Wolfe is using Book 1 as a presentation of the city of Nessus, the site of most of the events of the story, and Severian's experiences there. Severian is also the narrator of this story, reflecting on, through his writing, his time in Nessus and beyond. The story opens with Severian passing through the necropolis gates, think graveyard, on his way back to the guild's citadel after nearly drowning while swimming in the river. In the necropolis, he meets and saves the life of a notorious revolutionary and grave robber named Vodalus. The story is written in such a way that the reader is intended to be left unaware of the meaning of everything while also recognizing that these events are important to the larger story. The importance and relevance of these moments are not meant to become clear even at the end of the first book. What is the significance of Severian's experience in the river? Why is Vodalus digging up graves? Both are pretty astonishing, but not really answered in this first book. Shadow of the Torture lays the groundwork for establishing the atmosphere of Nessus and following Severian's journey through young adulthood as he heads towards his next destination, the city of Thrax. The city of Nessus and its inhabitants is written with textural detail that is dynamic and rich with attention to language, sociology, and culture. Severian is a young adult facing an approaching violence and conflict. The sequel, The Claw of the Conciliator, will tackle events that occur in Thrax and beyond. Following his apprenticeship, Severian becomes a journeyman of the guild. Considering the existence of a guild of torturers, you can imagine the process of law and order has evolved or devolved beyond no cruel or unusual punishment inflicted. The guild exists to apply cruel, unusual, and torturous punishment. Those of the guild refer to their prisoners as clients and make moderate efforts to extend hospitality to their clients. Make no mistake though, these clients are going to be tortured and it will be brutal. Just don't expect Severian to tell you exactly how brutal it is. Severian, it must be noted, is an unreliable, uncertain, and not entirely honest narrator. One example of his unreliability is the soft touch and justification that he presents for the legitimacy and appropriateness of his guild. This can mostly be forgiven as many of the underlying themes of this series stem from what is left unsaid as much as what is said. This is one of those instances. Enter the chatteling Thecla. She becomes a client of the guild and immediately grabs Severian's attention. Thecla and her experiences while imprisoned have a powerful impact on Severian. I must say, pun intended, he is consumed with her. This leads to him committing a crime that results in his banishment from the guild and his journey from Nessus to Thrax. While much of the intent of the story is intentionally vague, the reader is presented a character in Severian who is young, in many ways immature and finding himself, navigating the desire for love and to be loved, and of course dealing with whatever psychological impact being an orphan raised to be a torturer and taker of life might have. His friends, adversaries, and destinations along the way fill the rest of the novel. The Baroque atmosphere of Shadow of the Torturer is that of a dying earth, resembling in some ways Byzantine or medieval times, and in other ways bringing about questions or theories about time, reality, and mirrored dimensions that may or may not be represented. It's often espoused that Severian is meant to be a Christ figure. While the idea is not without merit, Wolfe, a devout Catholic, himself explains that he doesn't think of Severian as being a Christ figure, but rather thinks of him as being a Christian figure, a man who has been born into a very perverse background who is gradually trying to become better. Wolfe believes in this idea of humanity, that we all have somewhere in us an instinct to try and become better and defeat the darker sides of ourselves. Religious symbolism, as mentioned, and Wolfe's own Christianity are not always a swinkin to recognize in the text. For some of the religious subtext discerning the Semse may require some research. Confession, Semse, and Swicken are Old English words that perhaps you gathered their meaning because of the context in which I used them. Another thing Wolfe does in the novel, or rather throughout the novel, is use Old English and rarely used words to help develop this far future, far past feeling world. Wolfe has spoken publicly before about why he chose to use Old English and unfamiliar words, And I think that the part that resonates most is that it amplifies the atmosphere of Earth that he's trying to portray. In his own words, "A world in which people have been so limited in their vision of the future that they saw no other option except what was immediately in front of them. They've been practical and down to earth. They've gone on planting their cabbages. Well, there's nothing wrong with planting those cabbages, God knows. But when you ignore any possibilities except those cabbages, you wind up living in a world something like Earth, with its exhausted mines and exhausted farmlands. You get a land which may have had a long period of relative peace and stability, but it's a period of slow decay." What began actually as Wolfe's superficial imagining of a character that could easily be transformed into a sci-fi convention costume blossomed from start to finish, or gate to gate, into a complex, gothic, far-future dying Earth tale of honor, loyalty, redemption, resurrection, violence, conflict, and love, and one of the most critically acclaimed works of the 80s. Here now are my 5 likes and dislikes, including Book 1 spoilers, for Gene Wolfe's Shadow of the Torturer. Like number 1, Wolfe approaches Severian's guild as craftsmen with clinical precision and a high standard for duty. Introducing us to torture and execution from this angle successfully distracts the reader from the brutality and visceral reaction of horror that probably should occur. It's a great accomplishment of the writing that we can forgive the brutality and instead see Severian as an artist and a technician. Here, early in the story of Severian's justification, is also where Wolfe presents one of the main underlying themes of the series, that avoiding severely punishing violence does nothing to eliminate violence. It in fact may contribute to further violence. Like number 1, Wolfe approaches Severian's guild as craftsmen with clinical precision and a high standard for duty. Introducing us to torture and execution from this angle successfully distracts the reader from the brutality and visceral reaction of horror that probably should occur. It's a great accomplishment of the writing that we can forgive the brutality and instead see Severian as an artist and a technician. Here, early in the story in Severian's justification, is also where Wolfe presents one of the main underlying themes of this series, that avoiding severely punishing violence does nothing to eliminate violence. It in fact may contribute to further violence. Like number 2, the complete absence of info dump. I often forgive info dumps when they serve their purpose and do not interfere with the fictional realism. I appreciate them more when they are subtle and done with great skill. I respect greatly that Wolfe doesn't give an inch. There are no info dumps here. Severian's world is magical without magic, and is completely engrossing, even if it's possible to get lost in it and lose your bearings for much of the story. It's a unique and pleasurable reading experience, occasionally to have to rely greatly on your own imagination, allow scenery to pass over you, and find the bits of story inside of it all. Wolfe understands that a narrator telling a story to people of the same world is not going to explain every detail of that world, because there is an understanding that those who inhabit this world do not require it. Wolfe is consistent in this regard throughout. Dislike number 1, while I appreciate it, I don't always enjoy the religious symbolism, but mostly only because I'm not well versed in some of the historical Catholic references that I feel I miss out on if I don't spend time researching them. Dislike number 2, dare I say I wanted more sightseeing in the realm of the torturer's tools. Let me be clear, I'm not saying, ooh, let me find books where I get to see some people getting tortured. Rather, this book features a torturer. He certainly shines as an executioner, but the torture elements were maybe a letdown. The other side of this, though, is that in the Book of the New Sun, things that are left out, we may find out are significant because of their absence. Dislike number 3, Father Inire's Mirrors in the House Absolute took me a reread of the series to really grasp. I've read and watched a number of interviews with Wolfe, and he consistently asserts that his goal was not to mystify or trick the reader. I do believe he expects the reader to eventually get it. Of all the elements in the book that there are to grasp, I think the mirror is the one thing, if you look at it just in the read of The Shadow of the Torturer, that really stands out as obscure and confusing. For me. Like number 3, Severian's friendship with Jonas. Though their interactions may at times feel stiff or robotic, there is a chemistry in the relationship that is very enjoyable to read. Dislike number 4, this one gets thrown in as a dislike in so much as I want to call attention to it, and it doesn't feel appropriate to list it as a like. Severian mentions his friendship with some of the beast handlers at Bear Tower. Severian informs us that at some point the beast handlers shun human women and take a bear sow or lioness in marriage. There's much implication here not shared, and when it comes time to fill this with the reader's imagination, like number 4. The world building is excellent, from the medieval citadels and tunnels, towers that might be rockets, the witches and the services that they might provide, the lake of birds and its significance, the gardens, and the juxtaposition of a guild of torturers nonchalant in serving their clients while waiting to brutally torture them. Dislike number 5. The ruse with Aegea and her brother to set up the challenge with Severian to steal his sword is obviously a memorable moment in the story. I felt it needed more. The first part of it at the shop, it had so much more potential. There obviously was a setup here with the brother's mask, which also obviously I won't elaborate on, but it felt like the scene existed only for that. We get much more of these characters, especially Aegea, later. This hugely important scene, though, it felt rushed. Like number 5, Severian at the Botanical Garden, I enjoyed the dynamic and colorful atmosphere, and even more so, I loved how he was mumbling his storytelling to himself because he wanted to hear the story that he was telling, and Aegea did not. So he just went ahead and told the story to himself. It's interesting that he didn't frame it as, I wanted to tell the story, so I told the story, but rather, I wanted to hear the story, so I told the story. By the end of the story, we assume these gardens have more to them, but this is book 1, so we're not going to get into the spoilery stuff beyond this book. Bonus-like. The presentation of DNA early in the story is creative. There is a passage regarding a drachm of sticky fluid containing all seeds of familial resemblance between generations. This presentation is in itself a like just for the language, and like most of my likes here, it becomes a greater like when applying what would be spoilers for the full series of the Book of the New Sun. Bonus-like. Oh, the characters. Of course, there is Severian, who I covered pretty well in the first part of this episode, the torturer, the executioner, the one haunted and driven by his past and his path forward, featuring examination of his motivations, redemption, existence, psyche, and of course a desire to be revered and loved. There are Thecla, Dorcas, Agia, Aegialus, and Vodalus who impact him greatly and are only revealed to be more in future books. Dr. Talus and Baldanders are seemingly insignificant small characters with surprising or even alarming larger backstories not yet revealed. Even the Dr. Frankenstein vibe among them is a bit of a misdirection and not really complete until you consider an even lesser character, the waitress, perhaps tempted by the promise to be made beautiful in the mix. Then there are the other characters I'm not mentioning to avoid spoiling some of the great aha moments yet to come. Before you go, click on the thumbnail for the top 150 science fiction reads video and see what other books made the list. If you've already watched that one, check out one of my tags. Thank you, I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read.